If I could ask everyone to take their seats, please. Get your coffee and then take your seats, please.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Raghu Sundaram. I'm the Dean of the Stern School of Business, and it's my pleasure, honor, and privilege to welcome all of you to today's event. The financial case for sustainability is obviously something that is very, very important. At Stern, we very often talk about doing well by doing good. This is one of those cases where Tansy, for example, has been working very hard at making this financial case, and it's something that we are very keen on making an articulate and compelling case on this front. So I'd like to thank, on behalf of the Center for Sustainable Business, I'd like to thank the event sponsor, Bloomberg, and the media sponsor, Harvard Business Review. My job here is actually very short. I have to run to another meeting after this. My apologies for that. But it's a job that gives me a great deal of pleasure, and that is to introduce Tansy Whelan. Most of you already probably know Tansy well. I got to know her really only about 2 years ago, I think, when I had my first conversation with her. As most of you who know her know, Tansy is one of those true forces of nature. You've heard of people hitting the ground running. She came to Stern and hit the ground sprinting at full speed. She's been amazing in this whirlwind of activity, and not just activity, but actual achievement that's come out of it in setting up the Center for Sustainable Business, offering concentrations and specializations in sustainable business and innovation to our undergraduate and graduate students, starting an entire movement around the notion of sustainability in a business school. Not just that it belongs, but that it should actually be at the center of what we do, should never be far from our minds in terms of what we do. While I mentioned the Center for Sustainable Business, I should also thank, the City Foundation for the $1 million gift they gave to get the center launched. We're looking forward to more such gifts coming. There's a person on the way to collect your checks as you leave. So for those of you who don't know Tansy, her experience before she came to Stern includes 15 years running the Rainforest Alliance, where she had a major impact on transforming forestry and agricultural supply chains, working with major global companies like Mars, Unilever, IKEA, Staples, and others, to certify as sustainable more than 10% of the world's tea and cocoa. She also sits on advisory boards for sustainable practices for many such investing firms like Arabesque and Inherent Group. So importantly, she speaks the language of today's topic, which is finance and sustainability. So with that, let me again welcome all of you to today's event, and let me turn it over to Tansy. Thank you.
Raghu just joined us as Dean of the Business School in January, and we're so pleased to have him lead the school. Thank you, Raghu. So I, too, want to thank Bloomberg and Lee Ballin for sponsoring this event, making it possible for us to be together. And I want to thank Addie Ignatius at Harvard Business Review as well for the terrific work they're doing on the future economy, and also for their support of sustainability. I want to thank John Platko, Kyung-Al Park, and Paula Leff, who've all been very helpful in helping us create a great invitation list, all of you sterling people on it. And I want to thank Nespresso for bringing their sustainable coffee here. It's a terrific cup of coffee, as you know. And also, Nespresso works with 80,000 small farmers around the world with Rainforest Alliance and local NGOs to ensure that that coffee is sustainable. So no guilt, enjoy a tasty cup. Couple of announcements, very important one. The bathroom is outside and to the left. And if you would like to tweet, we hope that you will use our hashtag CSB Practice Forum. I want to thank Holly Williamson and Sophie Rifkin, who have been the masterminds behind organizing this event. Just a round of applause for them. It's a lot of work. And the slides, so you don't have to madly take notes, the slides will all be made available to you after the event. So we're here today to talk about the comprehensive financial case for sustainability. We have the next 24 hours working together around this topic, and a lot of fascinating work that's being done. And since I'm amongst friends, I know that we all agree that sustainability creates financial value. But our challenge is, how do we better measure it? Sustainability and environmental, social, and governance issues are often in what we call intangibles. Not all intangibles, but many. And one of our challenges, which is bigger, is that accounting in some ways is no longer fit for purpose for looking at these intangibles. Accounting used to deal with the fact that back in 1975, for example, 20% or so of a company's value was in intangibles. Today, it's around 80%. And sustainability and ESG is in that 80% in many cases. We also have the challenge in terms of understanding financial value in that we all speak different languages. So the corporate sustainability folks speak a different language than the corporate finance folks. The investors speak a different language than the corporate representatives, and within the investor community, the sell side speaks a different language than the buy side. And civil society speaks another language, and I will admit that the academics speak an entirely different language. We also need to look at how do we value short and long term when we're looking at valuation and accounting for sustainability, which is challenging. We need to better value sustainability risk. It's really only in the last 5 years that we're starting to see that sustainability risk is not a long-term issue. It is a short-term issue. It is here now, and we need to manage for it. We need to figure out how to monetize risk mitigation issues. We also need to better value the upside. What are the sustainability benefits from a financial perspective? When we see that innovation, employee engagement, operational efficiency all comes from sustainability, we need to better monetize and track those benefits. And we need to do this all in a radically transparent world where everybody can see into our business and see how we're measuring things, and we'll have questions on how we're doing it and how credible it is. And we're doing it in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world where the rate of change, particularly around sustainability and technology, is incredibly rapid, and we're all dealing with how do we manage this VUCA world that we're in, and how do we then learn how to monetize these issues when they're changing so fast. We're also looking at a situation where, for the companies, this rate of change and complexity is affecting them. This is an HBR article called the Biology of Corporate Survival, and when you look at it, the authors have found that companies are dying younger because they're failing to adapt to this increasing complexity, a big part of which is around sustainability. The upside is that we've seen that there's a very strong correlation between good sustainability performance and good ESG performance. This meta-study of 200 different academic studies by Arabesque and the University of Oxford found that good ESG performance results in lower cost of capital, better operational performance, and better stock performance. But again, the challenge is that this is correlation, not causality. In other words, when we look under the hood, we don't know why we're seeing better ESG performance here, right? We're seeing some correlations in some cases, particularly with material ESG factors. But because corporations are not actually tracking the ROI on investment in a number of these areas, we can't really manage better in terms of both the corporation decision-making and investor decision-making. So we need a new accounting or valuation framework, and we're seeing a number of companies, investors, individually working on this, but we're also seeing coalition of groups come together around it. So there's the Embankment Project, which the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism is running with Ernst & Young, looking at how to value a firm's intangible strategic assets. There's the UN Values Driver that's looking at how to assess the financial impact of sustainability strategies. There's Project ROI that's also looking at how to define financial and wider business value. And there's Driving Sustainable Decisions, which NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business has been working with around the ROI on sustainability investments, and we've designed together an open source online learning tool for this. So at the center, at Stern, we feel in a unique place to be able to contribute to moving forward this agenda. We are, our students, most of them go into finance. We have strong ties with Wall Street. We have a lot of students going into, both corporate finance and investing. And we have faculty that have a lot of experience in this area. So here at the Center for Sustainable Business, our mission is to ensure that current and future business leaders learn how to embed sustainability core to their business strategy and use that to drive innovation, employee engagement, et cetera, and ultimately greater value for society and the planet. We work in education. We have a sustainable business specialization, undergrad and graduate executive courses, as you heard Raghu mention. We have an outreach program where we bring in C-suite speakers, do events like this. And also we do a fair amount of research projects, a big part of which is around this financial case for sustainability. So let me just pause for a minute and say I see some people are standing in the back, and we have a couple of seats up here if anybody wants to sit down. I love that this is so popular. We're standing room only. There's 6 or so seats over here. And then we can also sit along the side there. Great. So at Stern Center for Sustainable Business, we've put together a broad framework around the sustainability drivers of financial performance and competitive advantage. So when a company embeds sustainability strategy in its strategy and practice, we see a variety of different what we call mediating factors. We see that it improves customer loyalty, employee relations, innovation, media coverage, operational efficiency, risk management, sales and marketing, supplier relations, and stakeholder engagement, which then in its turn drives greater profitability, higher corporate valuation, and lower cost of capital, ultimately delivering short and long-term value creation for shareholders and society. So this is the broad framework that, again, nothing brand new, but sort of putting this all together. We have then piloted in a couple of different sectors, starting first with retail and then moving on to automotive. So I want to tell you a little bit about the first pilot project that we did, taking this methodology down to a field level with McDonald's, looking at deforestation-free supply chain commitments. As you may know, about 450 companies have made commitments to have no deforestation in their supply chains. And in Brazil, beef is the biggest driver of deforestation, both through ranching and through soy production. So we worked with McDonald's and Carrefour, which is a European retailer with stores in Brazil. A.T. Kearney, who was our technical partner and helped us on the methodology, as well as slaughterhouses, JBS, and more, and groups of farmers and a number of NGOs, including the Nature Conservancy, and also with Antea Group, who's been working on these sets of issues. And basically, we went in and analyzed the sustainability benefits for ranchers, and then financially for ranchers, then slaughterhouses, and then for retailers. For the ranchers, we were able to get real data. For retailers and slaughterhouses, we were able to design the metrics, run those by them, but then populated them with public data. So I want to put that caveat out there. The way in which we designed the methodology to take this down at the ground level, the field level, was to first identify material ESG issues for the sector using SASB as a guideline, and then pull out what the related sustainability initiatives and strategies were for the different sectors. We then identified specific sustainability benefits using those mediating factors that I told you about. So we looked at what was happening in terms of innovation, what was happening in terms of employee engagement, et cetera. And then we quantified and monetized the benefits. So the 19 benefits that we identified include everything from better cost management and innovation in agriculture techniques to talent attraction and retention. And we put them into buckets including cost reduction, revenue increase, risk avoidance, financial valuation, and other, which includes, among other things, talent. And we saw that of these 19 benefits, we saw them run across all three, but not all of them, all three areas. So just to give you a couple of examples of how we then calculated the financial benefits, this was an example on the cost reduction side for ranchers. We said, all right, we saw that there was better cost management through better agricultural practices because they reduced the use of fertilizer and other inputs. So then we were able to actually go in and monetize before and after and project out over 10 years net present value what the difference would be for them in doing that. We also looked at an issue like higher land productivity. They used less land, so therefore they didn't have to pay additional rents, and they also were able to grow diverse crops, bringing in more revenue. And again, we had a monetization methodology after we identified the benefits for that. Ultimately, what we found for the ranchers was a 2.3 increase in productivity, 7 times increase, not 2.3 times increase in productivity, sorry, and a 7 times increase in profitability. And the ranchers went from 0 to 70% high quality beef. There also was a 20% reduction in GHG emissions, which we did not quantify. We did not monetize externalities, only the internal business case for these players. What was interesting in all of this, from a decision-making point of view, is one question that companies have had around their deforestation-free commitments is, should we be asking for sustainable agriculture practices? Because isn't that too much? Shouldn't we just be asking for deforestation-free commitments? But actually what we found out is it's the sustainable agriculture uptake that drives better financial performance, which then enables them to invest in the deforestation-free commitments, right? So very important from a decision-making perspective. Again, these, I know it's hard to see the numbers, but you have this in the pre-read that we sent you. Total net benefits for Novo Campo, which was a bunch of small ranchers, and Fazenda São Marcelo, which was a very large ranch, ranging from 1 to 5 million net over 10 years, and between 16 and 29 million over 10 years for the larger ranch. So for ranchers, a really significant financial benefit when you looked at all these different categories, again, which we had monetization behind each and every one of those categories. For slaughterhouses, the main 2 areas of benefit were around revenue increase and risk avoidance. And there, again, at the net level, we saw for Marfrig, which was a much smaller slaughterhouse than JBS, between 1 and 16 million, and for JBS, between 17 and 103 million. One thing that I will say about this is that shortly after we did this study, JBS had a major corruption issue and saw their valuation tank, their CEO go to jail, et cetera. We only put $72 million on risk avoidance, being very conservative. Actually, we could have put $1 billion there, and that's what it would have ended up being for them. My point there is that these numbers are directional. But I am willing to bet that neither JBS nor Marfrig have actually ever tried to figure out and monetize the risk for not doing things correctly, right? So calculation method here, just looking at the revenue. One example on the revenue side, we looked both at price premiums and broader mainstream increase in demand for sustainability, assigned a probability to increases, and again, a 10-year sort of net present value assessment on this. Looking at retailers, this, to remind you, is just for their Brazilian operations. And Carrefour, we saw net financial impact of between 6 and 40 million, and for McDonald's between 6 and 22 million positive. And also here was both revenue increase and risk avoidance were the main categories of financial benefit for them as companies. And just to show you the types of risks we looked at monetizing, this is a very difficult area and an area that we would love to see more people work on. Again, we feel that our findings are directional, not perfect. And so we want to figure out how to do this better. But we looked at operational risk avoidance, market risk, regulatory risk, and reputational risk avoidance, and how to monetize that. So moving on from our work in beef, we then decided to engage with the automotive sector because they too have a series of environmental, social, and governance issues to deal with in a rapidly changing environment from a technology and sustainability perspective. So Aston Martin, VW, and GM, who you'll hear from later, are 3 of our partners. And again, we started with looking at what were the SASB material issues for the sector. And then we went through and identified what the sustainability strategies were, the practices were, and the benefits were. This is just an illustrative subset. There were far more strategies, practices, and benefits, but just to give you a sense of what we're looking at with them. So if a strategy is to reduce resource and water use, we saw one practice was around implementing new water irrigation systems, which then led to reduced costs for water and energy. Another one was around improving employee relations. We looked here at a practice was implementing ergonomic changes to the production line, which led to higher productivity and increased safety for workers. And again, what those benefits on the right-hand side, my left-hand side, we can go through and are monetizing all those to figure out what the actual value is. And ultimately what we want to do is be able to look at this across everything and see where are the areas where the most financial value comes. Now you may decide to do things not just because they have a financial value, but understanding where the ROI is, I think is very helpful from a decision-making point of view, even if you're going to do things that have a lower ROI. And again, just looking at how we calculated, for one example, improved waste management. We looked at a variety, and this was net, right, but a variety of savings from using recovered recycled water, energy savings in manufacturing, cost avoided from traditional waste removal, savings from recycling water use in manufacturing. And then figured out a way to monetize all those things. And then finally, here's another example on the improved waste management. We also saw that there was a revenue source because you can increase your revenue from selling recycled materials, and we figured out a monetization method for that. So this is, again, just a small subset, very much at the beginning, but we're really enthusiastic to be working with the automotive sector. Our next area will be fashion. So this will be the sector we'll actually have a partnership with the Stockholm School of Economics and working with them to identify companies that would like to begin to test these practices in their own sector. And there, I think one of the interesting elements that we want to understand better is circularity, right, and the circular economy, and how do we better assess the financial return on that. So we are looking for partners to help us pilot and test this methodology, whether you're an individual company who'd like to do it or if you're interested in getting involved in a sector. We're developing tools to integrate this approach into quarterly and annual reporting. We're also exploring the role of sustainability in driving innovation, and we'd love to hear if you have case studies you'd like us to look at on that. We're developing a multi-stakeholder initiative in New York City aimed at identifying the business opportunities created by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Just as an aside, there's a really interesting study called Better Business, Better World by the UN Sustainable Business Commission, something like that, where they identified $12 trillion in business opportunities out of the SDGs and about 360 million jobs. And we want to take that down to New York City level. And finally, we have brilliant students ready and willing to intern and work for you. So really looking forward to our engagement over today and tomorrow and to learning from all of you, and hope to have the opportunity to work with you more in the future. Thank you. So I'm going to give the quick agenda and then turn over, but let me just see if there's any questions on the methodology before I summarize what we're going to do the next 2 days. Yes?
On the quantifying the revenue increases on McDonald's, what was your thinking? How did you do that and the methodology there?
So McDonald's does not charge a premium for their product. So there, the revenue was associated with having higher quality product, lower risk in sort of supplier disruption, as well as being able to, I think some of the things we looked at, for example, they were able to have their burgers in the soccer, sort of the Olympics and things like that, so better opportunities for them and more visitation because of the reputational benefit, so more demand, basically. Any other? Good. I want to make sure we have plenty of questions for everybody else. So just to quickly go through the agenda, next up will be a terrific fireside chat with Addie Ignatius from Harvard Business Review and Barry Parkin, Chief Sustainability Officer at Mars. And I just want to say there that what Mars has been doing over the last 10 years, really, and worked closely with them when I was running Rainforest Alliance, is truly, really exciting. And this latest effort, both in terms of the $1 billion committed, but also the ROI analysis is really exciting. And I'm so thrilled with what Addie is doing at HBR with the Future Economy Project and really bringing sustainability to the discussion at CEO level through the great platform that HBR has. Then we'll have a panel, Business Case in Action, with corporate sustainability practitioners, a break, and then our final panel, which will be on sustainable investing with our talented moderator, Bob Eccles, who's been really terrific at helping us bring people to that panel. Cocktails, which we'll get to where they are. And then the next day, we will have a opening address by Doug Beal on some really interesting work that they're doing around valuation multiples for companies or industries related to sustainability strategies, both on the risk side and on the upside, the increased margins. And then we're going to go into breakout workshops where we're going to have both corporate practitioners and investors work together to test these methodologies in retail, packaged goods, and manufacturing. I really hope you all can be there for that because we really want to learn from that process. And there'll be a panel to report out on it with both sustainability practitioners and investors. And then we'll have a great fireside chat with Emily Chasten from Bloomberg News and Andrew Liveris, Chairman and CEO of the Dow Chemical Company. And then Lee Ballin and I will close us out. So that's our agenda. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Addie and to Barry for the panel. So thank you.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you, Tansy. This is an amazing turnout. Such an amazing turnout, such a small room. Tansy mentioned a couple times what HBR is doing and the Future Economy Project. I want to spend 30 seconds on that and then get into what Mars is doing. But when Trump announced that the U.S. would pull out of Paris, we did something we don't usually do at Harvard Business Review, which is to actually sort of take an action independent of accepting an author's piece on one topic or another, and just felt that there's certain fundamental values. HBR is not about how to make rich people even richer. We think we're about how to make institutions last, how to make institutions be successful for the long term. So certain values like sustainability, like diversity, like long-termism, suddenly have become controversial. And at moments like this, it seems necessary to step up. And we have some great advisors, including Tansy on the project, and some great CEOs on the project. We call it the long-term economy. It's really a declaration that we believe in Paris and beyond. And we're linking to data, pledges, estimates of ROI from these 10 participating companies and hopefully others who are on the same path, and hopefully we can help other companies that want to be on a path like that to do so. But that's it for me. So Mars is, as Tansy said, doing something pretty incredible. And just really a few months ago, they announced a $1 billion commitment to what they're calling the Sustainable Intergeneration Plan. So Barry Parkett is the Chief Procurement and Chief Sustainability Officer at Mars, and this is amazing. So I guess the first question is, so suddenly one day you announced $1 billion. What happened that made you feel like, all right, we're doing this now? Was there a tipping point, or how does that happen?
It's never quite a tipping point, I think, but maybe the 1 minute orientation for everybody on Mars, because everybody knows Mars. We make chocolate products, don't we? Well, we do, but just to give you the bit of the history, it's about a 100-year-old company. We are the biggest producer of chocolate in the world. We're also the biggest producer of gum products, but also the biggest producer of pet food and pet services. So we're actually the biggest employer of vets in the world, would you believe it? So we're not just Snickers and M&Ms, but we are Snickers and M&Ms. The company's been around about 100 years, family-owned, privately owned, not family-run, but the board are made up of family members. So the fourth generation are our sort of age and actively running the business. And, of course, global business, about $35 billion for the finance crowd in the room. So, yeah, how do you suddenly decide to invest $1 billion? Well, for me, the story goes back to 1947, so you don't suddenly decide. So in 1947, the guy who really started the business, Forrest Mars Sr., wrote a letter to all of the then employees of the company, associates. And in that letter he wrote, the purpose of the company is to create a mutuality of benefits and services with all stakeholders. So he had this idea that his business could only be successful in the long term if everybody he touched was also being successful. And that was obviously the employees, it was the shareholders himself, but it was customers, it was suppliers, it was governments, it was competitors. So he listed all of these out and he said, this is the sole purpose of the company. So, that was a man ahead of his time. Now, it's taken us 70 years to work out what that meant, I guess. And what that meant was the Sustainable Generation Plan, which we announced, where we said, we've got to grow the business consistent with the planet. So healthy planet, we've got to grow the business consistent with doing the right thing for everybody around us, or thriving people. And we've got to do the right thing in terms of health and well-being, nourishing well-being. So long process. I guess we've sort of put it all together in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So tell us more about where does the $1 billion go? How does that break out?
Well, there's these 3 pillars in the plan. So there's a chunk against the environment. Probably it's about a third. So about a third against our environmental commitments, which are greenhouse gas reduction, so science-based reduction. So if you think about the business, about 25 million tons of greenhouse gas emitted, so about the same size as a small country. So we emit about the same amount of greenhouse gas as Panama, as across our entire value chain. So we've committed to reduce that by 2/3 in 30 years, which is the reduction required for the planet and every business needs to achieve, irrespective of how much we grow. So, we may have to, we've got to dramatically reduce our intensity. We've committed to zero water stress around the world, and we've committed to hold our land footprint flat, just on the environmental side. So we're investing in, and you can only do that, imagine trying to do that, you can only do that by transforming what you do. So a lot of it's about sourcing, raw materials, packaging, so buying different things from different places in different ways, and investing potentially in more expensive materials in order to solve for a lower greenhouse gas footprint. So there's a whole range of initiatives, but about a third on the environment, about a third on the socio-economic component, thriving people, and about a third on health and well-being. And there it's sort of product renovation, removing artificials, putting in place better for you ingredients without destroying the great products that we've got.
Yeah. So as you said, this doesn't happen overnight. This is a journey since at least 1927. But I know you've been significantly committed on a sustainability path for a decade or more. Could you talk a little bit about some of the learnings of the past decade? What's worked, what hasn't? What learnings you've applied now to this project?
So I think we really started about 10 years ago with a corporate level program, and typically what you do is you start with your own operations. So we've got about 150 factories around the world, and we started with an environmental program on those, which we called Sustainable in a Generation, because we recognized it was going to take a generation to achieve the targets. So we set greenhouse gas targets, water targets, and waste targets, and we sort of marched along that path. Now, frankly, we didn't have a clue how to achieve those targets when we started off. We knew it was something to do with efficiency and something to do with renewable energy. So we sort of learned as we went. The efficiency side marched on. What we started to discover was that there was a real financial benefit. So we started by putting, on renewable energy, we started by putting projects on our sites. Each site, we have a windmill here or a solar array there. And we realized that was not cost effective. And you couldn't get a decent ROI on that. But once you went to scale, we went to sort of national level projects, we suddenly started to see that we could do it and save money. So we've done a series of national renewable projects now around the world, US, UK, Mexico, and we're about to announce a couple of big projects in Australia, China, and potentially Russia. every single one of those is actually saving us money now. So we've reached a tipping point on some of these new technologies now, where it's actually we're getting hard cost savings from going green.
Yeah. So I want to come to those because I assume people will be very interested in some of the specific benefits. But before we get there, I'm interested. What is the how effective have you been in kind of measuring? You're measured everything, whether it's externalities or your footprint, or Can you talk a little bit about the science that's led you to this?
Yeah. So again, we start with the factories, and we understood the footprint we had there. But really, in the last 3-4 years, we've understood the broader footprint. So when we're a food business, and food business is based on agriculture, and so when we look at our greenhouse gas footprint, 97% of it is outside of our factory walls. It's upstream in agriculture and with our suppliers, and pretty much all of our water footprint. So by really going back and mapping our supply chains, often through multiple layers, up to 7 layers back to farmers or mining extraction, we've understood where the footprint is, both environmentally and socially. And that you then start to do the Pareto and start to work on the big issues. And that's led us to move from a program that was really focused on our own operations to really working to transform agriculture in particular. And interestingly, one of the things that came out of that maybe 3-4 years ago was we realized we had about 1 million farmers that produced for us around the world. And that was a bit of a watershed moment. We started talking to the board about these farmers and where are they? We showed them. I remember having this board, map of the world, showing where all the farmers were, and they were rough estimates, but they were extremely helpful. And then we said, what sort of incomes have they got? And we said, we think about 80% of them live in poverty, and maybe of that, half of them live in extreme poverty. And suddenly the penny dropped for the family that if they were really going to live up to that mutuality principle, we need to get our arms around the extended supply chain. And our supply chain is no different from any others. Any other food business and pretty much any other consumer goods business, you go back there, what do you find? You find poor people. And those are the people that you build your business on. So that's the challenge. So we had our eyes open maybe 5 years ago to the scale of the challenge that we had on the socio-economic side. And that was one of the trigger moments, I think, that got the family and the board really engaged. So the next, okay, now what are we going to do about it?
Right.
And
so
that's the plan.
I'd love to talk more about that, because it is, we all, I guess, get there at a different time. There's some people who are way ahead on sort of being committed to these issues, and others who take some time. I assume you've been fighting the good fight for a while, and one by one you're bringing other stakeholders along, whether it's the board. And anything to say about, so it sounds like to one extent the tipping point was the kind of poverty issue, but on some of these other, particularly more classically sort of issues we define as sustainability, what have you? What is the persuasive argument that gets people in line?
Well, I think we're no different than any other organization. Everybody has a board or a set of owners, and they're all different. So. We happen to have 10 members of the 4th generation of the family, and 3 or 4 of them would go, let's just do this. It's a great thing to do. It's our duty to do this. And there'll always be 3 or 4 who are like, show me the return. So if you want to get all of them, then you need to appeal to all of those. And I'm sure that's true of pretty much every organization. So we knew we had a lot of support from a principle point of view, from a values point of view. That this is the right thing to do, and we believe that it will pay back in the long term. But we needed to bring along the others, or show me the return. So we did a fair bit of analysis over the last 3 years to really try and put some hard numbers against the business case for this.
Yeah. And then how do you begin to operationalize this? So you make a commitment like this, everybody's on board, we're doing it. How do you then, have the metrics, have the strategy to make sure everyone's sort of going along for the ride?
I think it's at a whole range of levels. So, at the board level, it's about shifting from purely measuring on the financials. So, Mars was no different. That the primary metrics were earnings, cash, and growth, and had been for the previous 100 years. And that's what we remunerated senior managers on for those 100 years. So what we've done is alongside those, we've put the ESG measures. So we've got environmental targets. So, at the same level, alongside cash earnings, we have a greenhouse gas reduction number. We have a number of people with meaningful improvement to their lives alongside the cash number. And those are being measured by the board, tracked by the board, and we're now starting to build them into remuneration. So, you have to go all the way. Until somebody clever in this room comes up with a valuation formula that truly values the totality of these metrics and moves away from just a view of a multiple on earnings, you have to measure them separately. So we're operationalizing the measurement of these individually. We've cascaded those down to the business units. So the general managers are responsible for delivering their component parts of a greenhouse gas reduction or a water reduction. So we're treating them as business metrics.
But some of them will have a positive effect on ROI, but some might not, but are still measurable.
Well, the analysis we've done says that collectively they have a strong return on investment. I think this is highly pertinent. If you're looking for a return over the next 3 years, you won't find it. You'll find some of it, but if you're only interested in the return in 3 years' time, you would not invest in much of what we're doing. You have to be looking over. I think I always say, the return is typically in the 5 to 15 year range, not in the first 5 years. Some of it is, classical efficiency projects in your factories. You're probably getting a return within 5 years, but some of the other returns are more in that 5 to 15 year range.
So you're a private company. Is it easier, do you think, to do a plan? You're talking about the payoff being out there a bit. Is it easier to do that as a private company than as a publicly listed company, do you think? I
think it is, yeah, because you're able to take that longer term view on the return. There are some disbenefits from being a private company, but one of the benefits is that you can take a longer term view, and for sure, until the markets value, who appreciate the value that's being created in that 5 to 15 year range, then it will be harder for publicly traded companies.
Yeah. So I'd love to drill down to the extent that it's possible to do so on some of these returns on investment.
Yeah.
And you talked about some of the quicker wins that you can get. But can you, I don't know, give some examples or something about how this plays out?
Chauncey's gone into a lot of numbers up here, but the buckets are the same. That you start with the pure cost savings, and some of those are obvious in the factories. You do an efficiency project, you save money, you save greenhouse gases typically on an energy reduction project. Renewable energy I talked about, so very concrete savings on every single renewable energy project we've done at scale. We have saved money versus fossil fuels. So the argument that this can't be done is baloney. It can be done. And then one of the poster child projects that we've been involved in a long time is cocoa. Cocoa's, you can't make chocolate without cocoa, so it's what we would describe as a critical ingredient. And we spend about $1 billion a year on cocoa. And frankly, if that industry doesn't become sustainable, the price will go significantly higher. And it's easy to see what the cost impact on us would be. So we have a number of critical raw materials where we believe if we do not have sustainable farmers and thriving businesses, then we'll have scarcity and we'll see a significant cost increase. And then there's a price on carbon. You can take a view on what you think, whether there will be a price on an additional price. There's already a price on carbon, but whether you think there'll be additional pricing on carbon, we have a point of view that there will be. So we put a probability against that and a price on that, and put that against our carbon footprint, 25 million tons, and in 15 years' time we'll have 15 million tons of carbon, and our competitors will have 40 million tons of carbon, and we see a cost advantage and a price advantage and a competitive advantage from that. So you have to model it. You just have to, you're guessing, but you have to put assumptions against these things. But there's some very clear hard cost savings, and then there's some risk reduction. And Tansi talked about you can come up with massive numbers, so you've got to scale them back in terms of probabilities. But obvious ones like license to operate issues, seafood from Thailand, huge human rights issues in that industry, going into every seafood that you eat. Pretty much every seafood that you eat in the US is connected to those supply chains. The government could stop bringing that in, could ban that at any point. So there's huge potential business disruption if you can't segregate and isolate yourself from those issues. So again, you can put a price on the risk of all of these issues, which we have done. And then the third big bucket is talent. So we in terms of attraction and retention and engagement of associates, that there's quite a number of studies that show the potential benefits. So, a 3% increase in retention, lowering your retention rate, is big money. Attracting the highest quality candidates whenever you're looking out. So candidates for NYU, sure we've got some here in the room who'd love to work for us. You become attractive. And you can put a number on all of these things. So there's a lot. As Tansi mentioned, there's lots of studies out there that are grounded in the individual elements of this, which you can add up. So we see good returns on talent, and then finally on the growth side. So from consumer and a customer, we've actually been extremely conservative on that because the demand signal is still very weak. Consumers say they care about sustainability, but frankly, how many actually shop sustainably and are prepared to pay a premium for sustainability or a preference? It's a very small percentage still, and even from the retailers, our customers, our direct customers, the demand signal is very weak. So there's a number with strong sustainability programs amongst the big retailers, Carrefour, Walmart, but we might win awards from them, but we don't win more business.
Yeah.
That demand signal is still very weak. So we've assumed a very small. Now our belief is it's going to get stronger, and that companies and brands that have true sustainability credentials will be rewarded in time. But we haven't assumed much. But the bottom line is you add all of that up and you get a great ROI. So you don't have to dig that hard to get a great ROI, and that brings along the others who want to see a financial return.
Yeah, it almost seems contradictory that it's a talent retention tool to be carried about these issues, but then it sounds like even your own employees, when they go out and shop, they're looking at price and convenience and not. And I'm surprised that you haven't. I believe you, but I'm surprised that you haven't seen the needle move more on. Away from that in recent years. Yeah. No. So you're making this sound, and by the way, I'm going to open this up to questions to all of you in just a sec. You're making this all sound relatively easy, and I know you don't mean that, but what are some of the trickiest aspects of this? What are some of the biggest challenges? Some aspects are probably easier than others, but what are some of the tougher things to try to make work out now?
I think it's the time lag to the return. Mm-hmm. So even in a private business, okay, we've tripled our investment on this over the last few years to $1 billion a year, and $1 billion sounds like a big number, and in one sense it's a big number, but on the other side it's a very small number, and we'll invest tens of billions over the next 20, 30 years to become a sustainable business. But nonetheless, it's the question's still in the air. Are we investing more than our competitors? If we're investing $1 billion more than our competitors, that's a big deal within the P&L. Can we afford to do that in the short term? So I think one of the things here is really trying to get everybody moving together, and at an industry level, trying to get everybody moving together. It's much more reassuring to know, if we're investing $1 billion, then our main competitors are also investing $1 billion. So I think industry coalitions have been really important. So we've worked hard at that, and that's not always easy to build real coalitions of action across industry and sectors. We've done that pretty successfully on cocoa, and have all, the 9 biggest chocolate and cocoa companies are all investing similar amounts now in sustainability, which they weren't 5 years ago, which not only levels the playing field financially, but it actually drives much more significant change. And because at the end of the day, a lot of your reputational issues are connected to the industry, not to just your supply chain. So I think that's a big deal. And then measuring, so we still have the challenge of measuring the returns. So we can hypothesize about where the returns are, but some of these are still quite hard to measure and track. So that's still tough.
Yeah. Are there other companies that seem to be doing as much as you're doing, and if not, why not? Because it seems like, well, so a few years ago, Unilever was sort of way out there, and everybody knew what Unilever was doing, and all would say Unilever was leading the way, and you say, well, who's number 2? I don't know.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of companies like Mars that seem to be doing what you're doing? Or
I think everybody's raising their game. Yeah. I used Unilever as a stick to bash my board with for a while. Yeah. Mm-hmm. so they definitely had a sort of a catalytic,
yeah.
and still doing some great stuff. I think it's a bit industry specific. I know the food and beverage industry very well. I think generally that industry is doing a pretty good job, and a number of the NGO campaigns have made a difference. Oxfam's Behind the Brands campaign, which really created a race to the top on a lot of these factors, and nobody wants to be at the bottom of a public list. And then specific activist campaigns on issues has got people moving. I think the bit that's missing is a sort of a fully science-based approach to some of these targets. Everybody has some targets. There's nobody who doesn't have a greenhouse gas target. The question is the quality of the target and the action. It's extremely challenging to set the right target. A company is just a sort of a microcosm of the world. The world hasn't been able to. We all know that it's a 2-degree warming. We can all translate that to a greenhouse gas budget for the world, and no country, frankly, has set that target yet. So we're all on the path to chaos. Mm-hmm. At a company level, we've done that. We've set that target. There's very few who've done that. I'll say that. And then there's some taboo topics. Everybody talks about human rights and livelihoods, but not many people talk about extreme poverty. And that's the reality. And so we've tried to lead on a few topics and to get some more people talking about the issues and then addressing the issues.
Mm-hmm. And is the conversation within Mars that the board and others may have to accept smaller profit margins until, let's say, 15 years, when there will be dramatically improved overall returns? Is that?
Well, that's what the ROI means, I guess. If your returns are in the there's
yeah.
better finance people in the room for me, but if your returns are in the 5 to
right.
15, then yes, if we were if I was running a private equity business and was selling it in 3-4 years' time, and I was only measured on the financials, then I would not be investing in a bunch of things we're investing in,
yeah.
for sure. So we expect to see stronger returns than our competitors in that 5 to 15 and beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to open up. I'm sure people here will have, yes, the hands are going up. And the only thing is I don't think there's a microphone to go around, so go ahead.
About 20 years ago, actually, it's like 40 years ago, I was very young. And the impression I had of Mars is it's a very secretive company, almost to the point of paranoia, very private, very strange, you don't go in there at all. And more recently, it seems like, hey, you're opening up a little bit, you're investigating. My question to you, was I wrong about 40 years ago to see the convert was ultra secretive? And are you more engaged now? Do you plan to steer? What's going on with Mars?
Okay, so I'm going to let me restate the question because I know this is being taped. So this gentleman apparently was younger at some point, and but remembers that Mars was a sort of ultra secretive company, which I remember as well. And what happened? You know, see, it seems like there's been a dramatic change. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wasn't there 40 years ago, but I was there 33 years ago, and I didn't know anything about them when I joined. So I think you were right. You know, they're a private family, and you know, never sought the limelight, and so part of the reason was that they didn't want publicity, didn't need it, didn't feel the need for it, just wanted to build something. And part of it was a belief that, from a risk point of view, they were better off not having all of these brands associated with one company. So that if anything went wrong with a particular brand, you didn't know that Pedigree was made by the guys who made Snickers or whatever else. So they had their reasons for it, and at that time there weren't many benefits, frankly, if you're a private company. Now, I think over time they've understood that. There's an expectation of transparency that wasn't there, both financial and supply chain transparency, and they started to open up. But we were late to the game in writing a sustainability, a CSR report. Nestle, Unilever probably wrote one 5 or 6 years before we did. But every time we've been more open, we've been rewarded for it. I think is whether in terms of reputation or in terms of license to operate. So we've learnt over time, and we're continuing to push that boundary. The family is still like, convince me this is a good thing to do, to say more. But I guess we're becoming believers in more and more transparency.
Do you have a question? Yeah.
So this conversation here is about convincing the board, financial community, that sustainability pays off. About a week ago, exactly a week ago, in New York, there was the CEO forum where Paul Polman took the stage and unapologetically said that the business has to be a force for good with deliberate actions. So it's slightly reversed. You touched twice on the poverty issue in the supply chain. So my question is, could you describe the type of the conversation at the board level? Is it about doing the right stuff and results will follow? Or is it the role of business to do the right stuff?
So let me, I guess, just recast this for the folks at home. I don't know who this is for. But the basic question is ultimately, well, contrasting at the thing last week with Paul Polman, that he was saying the business has to be a force for good, kind of the primary goal. You've been talking more about sort of ROI. So the question is, what is the conversation at the board level like? We talked about poverty, where it's these sort of two views.
Yeah, we're talking about ROI because that's the topic of today. Would we have done this anyway? Yes, absolutely. And 1947 told us that we should do it and that we should believe we should get a return on it. So we would have done this anyway. We've done the calculation to keep ourselves honest, and of course to make it easier to bring those within a group that are, hey, I'll go with it, but what's the tell me the return, how do we track it? The reason we're talking about it today is that not all companies will see it that way. So I'm trying to make the case that whether you you approach this from a values perspective or not, you should approach it from a financial perspective. When you've got both, it becomes very compelling. So, you know, back to the poverty question, you know, when I put in front of the board that, you know, there are 1 million people in our supply chain and many of them are living in poverty, they said, what are we going to do about it? They didn't say, what's it going to cost?
Question in the back. Pink, purple shirt.
Hi, Barry. Donovan Gordon with my startup. We're actually on several conference calls last year regarding Renewable Thermal Collaborative. So I know Mars and you particularly are one of the driving forces behind it. Can you explain what it is and why it's important to Mars and what's the financial benefit to you in the long run?
Of the...
Renewable Thermal Collaborative.
Okay, so this is a...
You can restate that one. I couldn't hear.
Yeah. This is an advertisement for the Renewable Thermal Collaborative. And it is important because when people think about renewable energy, they think about windmills and solar panels, and that gives you renewable electricity. But for a company like us, half of our energy is in electricity and half of it's thermal, so to drive heating and cooling, which comes from burning gas typically at our plants. So we have to solve that side of the equation as well. So the gentleman is talking about the industry coming together to come up with solutions on the thermal side, which don't currently exist. And so it's critically important. So did I cover that well enough for you?
Yes, you did. I'm talking to David Gardner on Thursday.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, Bob.
So you told Jared you're becoming more transparent. I think that's great. Here's my question. You're a private company, so you don't have to report anything, right? But the TCFD came out with their recommendations on financially related climate disclosures. Does Mars have any plans to publish any kind of report following the TCFD's recommendations?
Okay, so the question is, again, noting that Mars is a private company, the question is whether Mars has any plans to publish some sort of public account of whatever, the TCFD.
What is the content of TCFD? Sorry.
It's the Task Force on Financially Related Climate Disclosures.
So climate disclosure. Does Mars, I guess, plan to make some of that public?
It's a big deal. Have you heard of it?
Sorry?
Have you heard of it?
Nope, I haven't. But is the question, are we publishing our performance on climate?
No, the question is, do you plan to try and publish according to the recommendations of...
I have no idea. Sorry. We will be publishing and have been publishing our greenhouse gas footprint. We will be continuing to publish the reduction in that. We're measuring that across our entire Scope 1, Scope 2, 3 emissions, and we'll be publishing the activities that drive us towards that. I don't know whether that's the same as the regulations that you're talking about. Okay. I can't answer that now.
All the way in the back.
Thanks, Jonathan Howell with Designing Sustainability. I want to go a slightly different direction in the consumer package you mentioned briefly. Help me kind of untangle a couple different pieces, right? So the initiatives you're undertaking make financial sense. You're attracting millennials, you're having retention rates that are higher, using water, energy efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. The ROI, you got a different hurdle rate, or goes a little bit longer, board's going to take me some deferred profits. So why then still, in terms of bringing demand, damping demand, why is the price of the product then still need to go up for the retail consumers buying the product? If all of these things are making sense financially, is the consumer providing sort of bridge loan, essentially, until the ROI hits, or why is it more expensive?
So do you want to
Paraphrase the question.
Paraphrase the question.
Yeah. I have the mic, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question is, if there's a return and we're saving money, why does the price need to go up to the consumer? The answer is it doesn't. It should come down. So I don't see any connection between the two.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, we'll let you follow up.
All right. So, okay, but I thought what you were saying was that the demand signal is still very weak because people will say that they'll buy, but then they won't pay the premium. So is there a premium necessary for all of these things that have been going on?
Well, some product categories will have a premium in, so often somebody will try and market something with a premium that's sustainable. But irrespective of the premium, consumers are generally, 97% of them are not shopping, making purchase decisions based on sustainability today, which is a shame. So we are trying through our brands to change that and find ways. We did something with M&M's, which is a huge consumer brand, billions and billions of consumers around the world. We did a PR exercise around fans of wind last year, where we tried to use the characters to get people interested in talking about renewable energy, for example. So we're trying to find the hooks between our brands and the consumer to engage them. But it's not to drive a premium. We would love to be rewarded if they bought more of our product than our competitors. And what I'm saying at the moment is that's not really happening.
We have to reward the man leaning around the pillar to be seen.
John Cusack, Computer Park Associates. One of the important parts that Thompson mentioned at the beginning is innovation is very important. I was just wondering, where do you get most of your innovation from? Is it from internal R&D and factors like that, or are you looking at some of the smaller companies like Monetize, the little chocolate company in Madagascar that has done some innovative ways to try and produce cocoa and reach the poor people as well? So where do you get your source of innovation to help lower the costs of your product as opposed to having it keep on going up because you're doing the same thing over and over again?
So this question was just, where does innovation come from? Is it internally through your own R&D, or are you learning from other, maybe smaller cocoa manufacturers and others?
Like innovation, it's in all types. It can come from anywhere, can't it? And it's often serendipitous. So the more you connect people, I'm a huge believer in. The more you connect people from different backgrounds, like here we are today. Am I going to learn something today? Sure I am, that I can apply to my business. So I don't think there's any magic formula about sustainability innovation. You've clearly got people in our business who are trying to think things through. But one of the things I think we have learned is collaboration. So within the industry, across the industry, with this idea of uncommon collaborations. So we did something on tell a short story. Aflatoxins, one of the biggest food security issues in the world. It impacts several billion people a year, hardly heard of. It causes liver cancer. It's in many, many grains and cereals around the world. We reject a lot of product at our factories because of high levels of aflatoxins. So there's a business issue, but there's a much bigger humanitarian issue here. We're trying to solve that issue. So we've got a pile of scientists working on that. We ran a competition with a bunch of gamers to try and find some new gene sequencing solutions to this. So that's an uncommon collaboration. We're going to the gaming community to try and solve a world food security issue. So we're trying to do lots of stuff, and some of them work and some of them don't.
Okay, there are a lot more questions. I'm getting the hook from Pansy, so we have to stop now. But please join me in thanking Barry for an amazing lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie and Barry. So if I can ask our panelists